If you see what they have done 1,000 years ago, 1,200 years ago, you will feel proud of being around because all the artifacts are incredible in terms of engineering. The mastery of engineering that they had and how the structures is too phenomenal. But they're all being systematically being run down, all the artifacts are being stolen, they're all mostly gone. For the temple are managing the temple.
Whoever gets elected, this one thing must happen.
Joining us now is Sadhguru of the Isha Foundation, and he's somebody who has also very actively spoken about the need for the Tamil Nadu government to let go of the control over Hindu temples or Hindu religious institutions. Sadhguru, let me start with your thought, because we here have said that it's time to take the right stand to free Hindu temples, but let me understand from you.
So let me bring a little historical perspective to how these things have happened. It all started with a regulation, a Madras regulation. It was called the Madras Regulation of 1817. So this was done by East India Company, not even by the British government. Then by 1840, the resistance built up within their own society that Christian men were managing pagan temples. So resistance came up in England. So in 1840, they wanted to give it back. So they put out a directive and said, okay, hand it over to the trustees. But then by then they had taken over, trusts were dismantled, all this had happened. So few main temples they handed over. By 1845, most of the temples were handed over, important ones. Then they passed a Religious Endowment Act in 1863, with which they made a complete handover of the religious institutions and endowments back to the Hindu community. Then in 1925, they passed a Madras Religious and Charitable Endowment Act. This included all religions. By now, this was a strategy to stem the independence movement in the country, and they found whether it's a mosque or a church or a temple, all of these things were becoming hubs for people to meet and, come together and act. So they tried to take over all religious institutions, but there was a vigorous resistance from the minorities, so they excluded them and brought the act only for the Hindus as it was called as the Hindu Endowment Act, Hindu Temple and Endowment Act, whatever it was called. Then further, they tightened the screws in 1935 that they could give, like a notification to any temple to take it over. And this is all happening before independence, but post-independence, in 1951, they passed this law of Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowment Acts 1951. And many provisions of this 1951 Act were struck down both by the Madras High Court and the Supreme Court. So during the Kamaraj era in 1959, they passed this Tamil Nadu Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowment Act was passed, which is still in operation right now. With this, over 37,000 temples are in government control. So what is the issue here? The issue is, one thing is, it's a disgrace that in a secular country that one community… I mean, if you say this in any other country, if you mention this, nobody will believe you. Nobody will believe in India religious institutions are managed by the government. So secular institutions means they should have no business with any religious institution. When we talk about the Hindu temples, immediately there's a whole group of people who'll say, then take over churches also, take over mosques also. I'm saying the government has no business to touch a mosque or a church or a temple or a gurdwara or anything for that matter. Right now, there is one problem, so let us multiply the problem. That is not a solution, all right? The important thing is, the devotees should manage the temple, because fundamentally, the Indian temples were not created as places of prayer. There is no single person leading a prayer for a group of people. It is largely different types of energy centers where people can go, soak themselves in that energy, whatever, whether you believe or not. It is true for millions and millions of people, for millennia. It has been the experience of people. Whether you believe, you don't believe, that is your issue, but in terms of basic human rights, this must happen. In terms of constitutional rights as fundamental rights, this must happen. But now there's a whole lot of people arguing, their argument is generally, but It was under kings, and kings were also government, so it was always under government. This is not true, because kings were devotees. Kings were very strong devotees, to such a point, in many kingdoms, the deity was the king. The king was a divan or a minister for the deity. So always the deity ruled, only in the deity's name he ruled the country. So they were a different people altogether, and there also the contributions came from the people to build the temples. Above all, these are, especially the South Indian temples, the Tamil Nadu temples particularly, they are magnificent creations of engineering and architecture. If you see what they have done 1,000 years ago, 1,200, 1,500 years ago, you will feel proud of being human, because it's absolutely incredible in terms of engineering. The mastery of engineering that they had and how they built these structures is too phenomenal. But they're all being systematically being run down, all the artifacts are being stolen, they're all mostly gone, because people who have no feeling, no heart for the temple are managing the temple.
Namaskaram, Sadhguru. Sadhguru, general elections are coming up this year. So, what is the one thing that you want the newly elected government to do?
There are many things that the country needs in terms of economic boost needs to happen, which definitely will happen, I believe, in the next 5 years to 10 years' time. Educational transformation needs to happen, but you're giving me only one thing. I have many things, but if it's only one thing, one most important thing for this civilization to burst forth and become something significant in the next 25 years is, the Hindu temple should come to the hands of Hindus. Why this is important? Because you must understand, Hindu temple is not a place of prayer. It is not even a place of worship. These were energetically consecrated spaces for different purposes, so that human beings will flourish, which they did in the past. When most of the world did not know what is what, we had the highest level of mathematics, music, astronomy, spiritual process. If you look at the thought process of people who were here 5,000, 10,000 years ago, but nowhere in the world anything like that happened. All this happened because we invested in the inner well-being of the human being. Temples are a physical, monumental representations of that. It is not a place of worship, it is not a place of prayer where somebody leads you to say, you give me this money, then I will send a message to God and He will respond to you and He'll talk to you and all that stuff. Here, you went there only to have darshan, not to pray, you must understand this. You did not go to the temple to pray, you went there only to have darshan. Because you can't keep quiet, you'll start thinking of all kinds of rubbish, they thought you something to say in a language that you usually don't understand. Because just to keep yourself focused, it's about darshan, imbibing the form into yourself. This is not to call God, to become God. This is not asking for somebody to come down and do something for you. It is for you to rise to that possibility. So, now we call ourselves a secular country, which we are not, because most of the Hindu temples are in the hands of the government, run by government clerks, systematically being ruined. There is no such thing as a temple without devotees. Only in the hands of a devotee, something becomes sacred. Hello? Can an employee who's looking what is his next increment can handle something which will bring that possibility to people? And temple was a fulcrum of art, music, culture, everything. All that is completely being decimated. So this is not a question of my culture versus your culture. This is a conscious culture which was created in a way that human consciousness will be the most important part of your life. Other things are secondary. This is why when people lived in shacks, they built temples that you can't imagine. Great feats of engineering, architecture, an immense effort. How 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, they could have built these temples when there were no machines, there were no transporting processes like machinery to transport or to lift stone.